Good evening, and thank you for joining us to honor and celebrate the life of an extraordinary person, Dr. Kapila Vatsyayan. Dr. Vatsyayan had such a variety of interests and expertise in so many fields that it would be impossible to mention all of them. But it would be safe to say that culture, in all its myriad forms and dimensions, was closest to her heart. So we begin this evening with a musical tribute with bhajans performed by Pandit Madhup Mudgal, senior artist and guru, Gandhar Mahavidyalaya. Panditji.
पश्चादहं यदेतच्च योगशिष्येतसोऽस्म्यहम् हृदिर्ब्रह्म्यप्रतीयेत न प्रतीयेत चात्मनि तद्विद्यादात्मनो माया यथा भासो यथा तमः यथा महन्ति भूतानि भूतेषु चावचेष्वनु प्रविष्टान्यप्रविष्टानि तथा तेषु न तेष्वहम् एतावदेव जिज्ञासम् तत्त्वजिज्ञासुनात्मनः अन्यव्यतिरेकाभ्याम् यस्यात् सर्वत्र सर्वदा। नैनो बीच नदी मुर्शिद नैनो बीच नदी आँखी मध्य आँखी मध्य पाखी चमक आँखी मध्य पाखी चमक आँखी मध्य आँखी मध्य मारा देहि द्वार दूरबीन लगा कर देहि द्वार दूरबीन लगा कर उत्तर भवजल उत्तर भवजल मुर्शिद नैनो बीच नदी मुर्शिद नैनो बीच नदी नदी है नदी है नदी है नदी है नदी 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 मुर्शिद नैनो बीच नदी सुन सहरन बास हमारा सुन सहरन बास हमारा हम सरवंगी जावा हम सरवंगी जावा साहेब कबीर सदा के संगी साहेब कबीर सदा के संगी सबद महल सबद महल मुर्शिद नैनो बीच नदी मुर्शिद नैनो बीच नदी सफेद तिलों पे तारा रवि मुर्शिद नैनो बीच नदी निरंकार निराधार निराहार निर्विकार निरंकार निराधार निराहार निर्विकार अयोनि अभाव अगम पर अयोनि अभाव अपरंपर अव्यय निरंकार निराधार निराहार निर्विकार निरंकार निराधार निराहार निर्विकार अजोनि अकाल अपरंपर अव्यय अजोनि अकाल अपरंपर अव्यय निरंकार निराधार निराहार निर्विकार निरंकार निर्मोह निर्भय निर्लेप निरादोष निर्मोह निर्भय निर्लेप निरादोष निर्भय निरंजन अतापर अतः निर्भय निरंजन अतापर निरंकार निराधार निराहार निर्विकार निरंकार निराधार निराहार निर्विकार हरिगतगम अगोचर अगाध अबोध हरिगतगम अगोचर अगाध अबोध अच्युत अलख अतवचल वचल अच्युत अलख अतवचल अचल निराधार निराहार निर्विकार निरंकार निराधार निराहार निर्विकार विषम विषम असचर जस असुचर जुमान विषम विषम असचर असचर जुमान अद्भुत परम अद्भुत गुरुदेव अद्भुत परम अद्भुत गुरुदेव निरंकार निराधार निराहार निर्विकार निरंकार निराधार निराहार निर्विकार अजोनि अकाल अपरंपर अजोनि अकाल अपरंपर अव्यय निरंकार चलरिया चलति बिरिया प्राण राम जप निकसन लागे
राम जब निकसन लागे
उलट गई गो नयन बुतरे गई गो नयन बुतरे चलरिया चलति बिरिया हमको उड़ावे चलरिया चलति बिरिया जीव महल में जीव महल जीव महल में शिव पहुनवा जीव महल में शिव पहुनवा कहाँ फिरत उन्माद रे महल में शिव पहुनवा कहाँ फिरत उन्माद रे
जीव महल में शिव पहुनवा कहाँ फिरत उन्माद रे
जीव महल में शिव पहुनवा कहाँ फिरत उन्माद रे पहुँचा देवा करला सेवा रहन चली आवतर जीव महल में शिव पहुनवा कहाँ फिरत उन्माद रे
जीव महल में शिव पहुनवा कहाँ फिरत उन्माद रे
पहुँचा देवा करला सेवा रहन चली आवतर
महल में शिव पहुनवा कहाँ फिरत उन्माद
रे
जीव महल में शिव पहुनवा कहाँ फिरत उन्माद रे
जुगन जुगन करे पति छन साहब का दिल लागरे जुगन जुगन करे पति छन साहब का दिल लागरे सुजत नाही परम सुख सागर सुजत नाही परम सुख सागर बिना प्रेम बरागर जीव महल में शिव पहुनवा कहाँ फिरत उन्माद रे
जीव महल में शिव पहुनवा कहाँ फिरत उन्माद रे
सर्वन सूर भूल साहेब से पूरन परगट भाग रे सर्वन सूर भूल साहेब से पूरन परगट भाग रे कह कबीर सुन भाज हमारा कह कबीर सुन भाज हमारा माया अटल सुहाग रे जीव महल में शिव पहुनवा कहाँ फिरत उन्माद रे जीव महल
में शिव पहुनवा कहाँ फिरत उन्माद पहुँचाने वानर न सेवा रैन चली
आवत रे जीव महल में शिव पहुनवा कहाँ फिरत उन्माद रे जीव महल में शिव पहुनवा कहाँ फिरत उन्माद पवन पानी धरती आकाशवा पवन पानी धरती आकाशवा चांदन सूरज नरन दिवसवा दिवसवा चांदन सूरज नरन दिवसवा दिवसवा जहाँ वासवायो अमरव देशवा भामन क्षत्रिन सूदन वैसवा भामन क्षत्रिन सूदन वैसवा मुगल पठान नसैयद आदि जोत नहीं गौर गण आदि जोत नहीं गौर गण ब्रह्मा विष्णु महेशन शेषवा Brahma Vishnu Mahesana Seswa Jहाँ से आयो अमर देशवा जोगी न जंगम मुनि दरवेशवा जोगी न जंगम मुनि दरवेशवा आदीनांत काल काल सवा आदीन अंतर काल कल दास कबीर ले आए संग दास कबीर ले आए संग सबत कही चलो देशवा देशवा सबत गई चलो देशवा देशवा जहाँ से आयो अमर देशवा 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 देशवा
Thank you, Panditji. I request Sri N.N. Vora, Life Trustee and President, IIC, to pay tribute to Dr. Vatsyayan.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Like all of you here this evening, particularly the family members of Kapila ji, Dr. Subhash Malik, Mrs. Usha Malik, Professor Aditya Malik, and others who are here this evening, we are all sad on Kapilaji's passing away. I had known her for a very considerable period and would miss her in the coming time. I was sitting there, and the picture is there. It's a little difficult to accept that she's not there. She was always there from morning till evening. Any program, any activity, she was never absent. Now, I would say that our gathering here this evening is to remember Kapilaji, to remember all the good things she had done in her long life, rich life, meaningful work, meaningful career. And I would therefore venture to say that we are here today to celebrate her outstanding life and career. Not to mourn or grieve. Of course, we are very sad, but to celebrate enormous work she was able to do and deliver till she passed away. She was quite frail in the last year or so, and weeks before she died, I had suggested to Dr. Malik that she may avoid coming to the ISC and to our director, Kailash Srivastava. There could be some of the other request, madam, discourage her, but she was insistent. I used to speak to her maidservant or her attendant, Vishwajit, or to Ramachandran, or through the director, we used to get daily news. She's keeping well. I last spoke to her on 13th evening. I can't say spoke to her. I rang up at the normal time. She used to be finishing her dinner. And the maidservant handed over the phone to her. She wanted to speak, and she didn't speak. So I guessed that she was very low in her energy, spirits. Fortunately, Dr. Subhash Malik was there that night. And next day we were planning to shift her to the Willingdon Hospital. Our director made all the arrangements, but again I would say luckily she didn't go. And she spent the last 2 days at her own home with the family, with people she knew. Now, where does one begin when one talks of Dr. Vatsyayan? It's a little difficult, but I would say she had a glorious educational career. She studied in Delhi, and she was a student of literature, as I was. But then she went to Michigan and she studied education. And she got involved in this correlation between education and culture, education and literacy, education and science, education and technology. And she had the opportunity to teach in Delhi University, to teach in Banaras Hindu University, where she did a PhD. She taught in Philadelphia University, she taught in California University. And during the course of a long academic career, she wrote nearly 24 books. She wrote 200 more and more research papers. And when she came back and she got into the mold of what she wanted to do in life, and that was in the arena of culture, and she decided consciously to teach herself, to get to know, experience what she wanted to do. We went through a course of Bharatnatyam, Kathakali, Manipuri. One of the first young ladies to perform a dance in Vigyan Bhavan when it was inaugurated. It was the time of Maulana Abdul Kalam Azad, Humayun Kabir, great names in the realm arena of education. we don't hear such names today. And when she chose to join government and to contribute her knowledge, her specialization. As it always happened in bureaucracy, it's a ladder, it's a system. I was a joint secretary in the government of India when I first met her. I was dealing with medical education, medical research. And in that context, I needed some clearances from the Ministry of Education. And I went to call on the Secretary of Education, and he said, no, I can't answer your question. I can't do very much. Go to Dr. Vatsyayan. She was advisor in the ministry at that time. That's the first time I met her. She was not a very easy person to deal with in official matters, and very uncompromising, very unsparing, and but always found an answer without cutting corners. So in the government domain, in the arena of public service, she rose to the rank of Secretary Arts. And this ministry was initially called Ministry of Education, they changed names and Human Resource Development and so on. And even after she had superannuated, after a glorious career, in which she contributed to what I would say in today's terms, cultural diplomacy, she was the architect of concluding cultural bilateral, multilateral agreements with 50 countries in the world. And when she superannuated, by that time she was acclaimed as an established authority in the arena of art and culture, in the larger sense. Whether it was setting up a museum, a library, or it was something to do with setting up an archive, or dealing with matters of archaeology, she was the one who was consulted. And the then Prime Minister in 1990, he sent for her and asked her to produce a concept paper on what led to the Indira Gandhi National Center for Arts, IGNCA, where she was the first founder academic director. In the international arena, representing India, she was a member of the executive board of UNESCO for many years. She was known worldwide, invited by various countries as a guest lecturer. She was honored by dozen universities in our own country, our art academies, Sangeet Natak Academy, Natak Kala Academy, the Russian Academy of Sciences, the French Academy for the study of Asian societies, our own Asiatic Society in Calcutta. You mention it, and she was known, recognized, honored. Now, I won't go more into all that she did. It's very well known. But one thing I would say, why she was so sought after and respected within the country, outside the country, she had experienced what we call culture. She had got it on a bloodstream. I would say, what are the core elements or the core concepts of given disciplines in the arena of art? She had got to grasp them. And she was battling with the interrelationship between the core concepts, the interdisciplinary approach. And that is where she got known in UNESCO. Not merely education, culture and science, culture and technology. The entire arena of civilization, dialogue on civilizations, dialogue between countries. She was involved in most of these things. As far as her own institution is concerned, the ISC, where I worked very closely with her for many years, she became a member in the late 70s, and she became a life trustee. She was vice president of the board of trustees. When I joined, she was a vice president. Then she was president for 5 years. I worked with her till Mr. Soli Sorabji took over from her. She chaired this very valuable wing of the ISC, which we used to, when we set it up, it was called the Asia Society. Then it became the International Research Division. And so she branched off into dealing with the longer term issues relating to culture and civilization. While we were doing day-to-day programs in the ISC, dance, drama, music, puppetry, theatre, what have you. She was grappling with some of the more intricate, complicated, and interrelated issues. And during her tenure for many years as chairperson of the International Research Division, some extremely valuable publications came out on the conferences which she had organized. So I would not take long because the director has told me the time limits. I would conclude by saying that Kapilaji in this institution will be difficult to forget by members, by those of us who worked with her, staff, employees, wherever she was. And incidentally, a fact which was not generally known or mentioned, she got Padma Shri years ago and Padma Vibhushan not many years ago. About 10 years ago, she got the second highest national award for services to the nation. So I would conclude by saying that I join all of you, and those of you who are not here today physically, in remembering Kapilaji and expressing our sorrow at her departure, and also expressing great satisfaction and joy, celebrate the beautiful life that she led and the enormous work she did for the country. Incidentally, before going back to my seat, last evening I got a beautiful letter from His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. I won't read it out because I think our friend Rajiv Malhotra is here today. Oh yeah, here he is. We requested him to please read out this very fine letter, which in its own way sums up some of the things I've said in not such an elegant manner as this letter says. Thank you very much, all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vora. Dr. Karan Singh and Dr. Vatsyayan shared many common interests and had a close professional relationship and also a personal relationship. Dr. Karan Singh is joining us to pay tribute through a virtual link. Tete, is he on?
To say that Kapilaji was a remarkable woman would be a gross understatement. She was one of a kind. She was a unique person. In my long life in politics and outside of it, in culture, I have met a large number of people. But Kapilaji was unique in the sense that she lived culture. What she spoke about was something that she herself had experienced. Intellectually, academically, she was outstanding. She studied in many universities. She taught in many universities in India and abroad. And as we have said, her grasp of the entire cultural ambience was something quite unique. It was never narrow. It was always inclusive. She wanted to find the underlying civilizational bonds that bound the human race together. When we talk of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, it brings to mind the cultural aspect, in which despite other problems we may have in any countries, there is a cultural affinity. And Kapilaji was quite extraordinary. She had an ancestry. We were particularly close. She was like an elder sister to me and always greeted me with great affection. She was, as Voraji has mentioned, she was in the government of India. When I became a cabinet minister way back in 1967, Kapilaji was advisor then to the Ministry of Education. Incidentally, thank goodness it is named education again. That HRD used to get on my nerves. I didn't like it at all. Education is a sacred word. She was an advisor to the Ministry of Education. I remember one day she came to me. I was sitting in the Nehru Memorial Fund and said, I want a Nehru Fellowship. to continue my work on the Geet Govinda. As you know, her work on the Geet Govinda is quite extraordinary. So we gave her a Nehru Fellowship, and she did an extraordinary bit of work in that also. That work, the work she did on the Tanjavur frescoes, all the other work that she did. I remember when the Mati Ghar was here, she used to have those astounding exhibitions. For example, she did one on Kham, space. She did one on Kal, or time. She did one on Prakriti, on the nature. And the creativity that went into those exhibitions was quite amazing. And then she was, in fact, the progenitor of the idea of the Indira Gandhi National Center for the Arts, which was set up. Unfortunately, it didn't develop quite as smoothly as we had envisaged, but she was involved very much in that. And in that manuscript section that she set up, she contributed, donated many of her own manuscripts to that collection, which is on the top floor of the building. She was an administrator also. She was an artist. She was somebody who cut across all divisions and distinctions. And what I particularly felt about her was the steely determination to do what she wanted to do. Nothing would stop her. I remember when I was the vice trustee for 4 decades, and when I became president of the IIC, I recreated the post of vice president because I wanted to involve Kapila ji in the work of the IIC. So we worked together very closely. That was a time when she was looking after most of the administrative work, leaving me and Boraji and Joshi free to build the annex, which we put up in 2 years. So then she became president of IIC. I had started during my term something known as the Asia Project, where we had every year a special exhibition, a special seminar on one part of Asia. We did 6 projects in the Asia Project, 6 years. And then she took over and expanded the scope of that Asia Project. It is now called the International Research Division. It was based on that Asia Project. And she had a number of very interesting exhibitions. I remember one called Sui Dhaga, which was about textiles and how all the seams in the textiles of various countries, as it were, mirrored each other. She was somebody who had strong views and strong likes and dislikes. And if she liked somebody, she loved them. If she didn't like them. She didn't make any excuses for people who didn't fulfill their work. She was a strict taskmaster in a way. But if you pierce that external steely part of her, she was a loving and affectionate person. But you had to know her very well to get that part of her personality. Otherwise, a lot of people would say, oh, she's a very difficult woman, very hard woman. Say, how can you manage with her? No. But that was, in a way, I think, sort of a facade to cover her innate cultural efflorescence, as it were. And I entirely agree that a life like hers should be celebrated. So we are not here, as it were, to mourn. We are here to celebrate a life, a long life, a life which had a lot of experiences and which made a major contribution to culture. Culture is something I've been involved in since my very early years, and culture is something which Kapila ji lived. She attended every function. I remember whenever I used to speak or whenever I was there, she was always there. And she always greeted me after that with a warm hug and said how happy she was to see me. So I will on this occasion again pay my tribute to her. Many people have this term, may her soul rest in peace. I don't believe that our souls rest in peace. I believe that our souls go on and on in their evolution towards perfection. So rather than saying rest in peace, my final words to Kapila ji would be Swasti Vaparaya Tamasapasta. May your journey across the darkness towards the light be auspicious. Thank you, Kapila ji, for what you were, for what you did, and for what you stood for.
I now request Mr. Soli Sarabji, Senior Most Life Trustee, the IIC, to speak.
Hello. Friends and admirers of Kapila Vatsyayan, it's impossible to believe she's no longer with us. She had a many splendid life, and as I said, I find it difficult to believe she's not with us anymore. Kapila ji had many attributes. I'll only refer to my interaction with her. When I became president of IIC, the aid and assistance I got for performing my functions effectively, one from the director that time, that's our president, Dalai, and also from Kapila ji. But Kapila ji, it wasn't very easy. She was very angry when I suggested any jazz musicians. She was very angry when I suggested certain speakers to speak on certain subjects she didn't like. But she was broad-minded enough to agree and let them speak. Kapila ji had a mind of her own. She spoke out to anyone, high or low, rich or poor, and told him exactly what she thought. But another thing I must say about Kapila ji is that she was receptive to different ideas. And you'll be surprised to know that she was interested as to why I like jazz and what is the particular thing about jazz. I couldn't get her to listen to anyone except Benny Goodman. Kapila ji's, I think, can be expressed in these words. She has kindness in another's trouble and courage in her own. Let us follow and emulate Kapilavatsya's example, and may her noble soul rest in peace. Yes, noble soul rest in peace, but peace of not as we know it. Peace as she wants it, peace in the IRC with new ideas, new entertainments, new discussions, and her own life was, she was an integral part of IRC. With her passing away, IRC has been diminished, and that is the unfortunate part, and we have to pray for providence to give her peace of mind and happiness wherever she is. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sarabji. Mr. Sham Saran, Life Trustee IIC, could not be here today. I will read out his message and try to convey the sentiments that lie beneath his words. I'm not sure I can do that. I quote, Shrimati Kapila Vatsyayan is no more with us. May her soul rest in peace. She leaves behind a void in India's cultural life that cannot be filled. Her life was steeped in the constant and deep exploration of India's rich heritage of art and culture, whether it was their diverse folk expressions or their classical manifestations. She celebrated India's breathtaking diversity, but was always able to pick up the deeper affinities that lay behind it. She would always emphasize that India's democratic impulse, its innate cosmopolitanism, and assimilative temper marked the country as a unique center of civilization with a universal appeal. It is this precious intellectual legacy that we must cherish and nurture in these times of fractured identities and narrowly conceived nationalism. The history of the India International Center is inextricably woven together with the fabric of her own life. If the center today serves as an oasis of civility and reasoned debate in our country, Kapilaji's leadership and the tone she set by her own example have much to do with it. The center gained credibility and acclaim through its uninterrupted association with her for over half a century and more. In her absence, we will need to redouble our efforts to live up to her high standards. My own association with Kapilaji spanned virtually my entire career in the Foreign Service and thereafter. She was an inimitable guide through the intricacies of Indian culture. Her knowledge about India's cultural links with countries to the east, west, and north was encyclopedic. In my assignments in Myanmar, Indonesia, and Nepal, I drew heavily on her familiarity with their cultures and art forms in promoting cultural relations. It is from her that I came to appreciate how powerful a tool could culture be in cementing India's relations with countries in our extended neighborhood. Kapila carried her formidable status as India's cultural icon very lightly on her shoulders. She was modest, full of humor, and till the very end harbored a childlike curiosity about a world changing rapidly around us. She was a gifted scholar and yet never ceased to be a student, constantly adding to her vast store of knowledge. She was India's living treasure and will continue to sparkle in a country that is proud and privileged to call her its own. Unquote. I'm reading out another message. This is by Dr. Sachin Chaturvedi, who is a trustee of the center and Director General RIS. He writes, Dr. Kapila Vatsyayan, an internationally acclaimed erudite scholar, made immense contribution through her research on manuscripts and through her work in the realm of culture that envisaged larger global connect of India in the field of art, culture, and civilization. Her special focus on South Asia and Africa provided prominence to the IIC. Apart from being an accomplished artist, she was also an able administrator. She was closely associated with the establishment and development of prominent institutions such as the IGNCA and had a number of publications to her credit for the far reach of Indian culture. She was a recipient of the Padma Shri, the Padma Vibhushan, and a number of national and international awards. She deeply enriched the discourse in the realms of culture and art with her profound knowledge and perceptive insights. We will always cherish the fond memories of her warm and gracious presence among us, though we would be deprived of her expert advice and guidance. Dr. Kapila Vatsyayan had a special rapport with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, not least because of her support for the Tibetan cause. His Holiness has sent a message which will be read out by Mr. Rajiv Mehrotra, a student of the Dalai Lama and Secretary, the Foundation for Universal Responsibility.
Well, a brief personal word to say how deeply privileged and blessed I feel to read this message from my root guru, my guru, for a remarkable teacher who impacted hundreds of thousands of lives by who she was as much as by what she did. So we've had a narration about all the wonderful achievements she had, but as Amita pointed out, she had a very special personal relationship with His Holiness, which went far beyond the narrative of the doing to simply being who she was. And two sort of incidents, come to my mind. And at a time when there was a great deal of turbulence and violence in Tibet, and Kapilaji had called on His Holiness, and so His Holiness said, Mataji, your son is deeply anguished and deeply troubled. There was another occasion. This was a talk on a seminar on compassion, and Kapilaji was sitting next to His Holiness on stage, and she said, what is all this, compassion? How can I be compassion? So he sort of picked up the sort of, the edge of her, sari and neatly folded it and said, Mataji, motherhood is the embodiment of compassion. And so there was this great ongoing relationship where, she would sometimes, with great respect and reverence, tease him, and he would tease her. And the spontaneity of that was very transforming for all of us who were privileged to observe this. And when we set up the Foundation for Universal Responsibility with the money from the Nobel Peace Prize, His Holiness called upon two Indian trustees, Baba Amte and Kapilaji, to help shape and set up that institution. So it is a deep honor and a deep blessing. And thank you, Mr. Vora, for this. So I quote His Holiness, "It is with a mixture of emotions that I remember my dear friend, Srimati Kapila Vatsyayan. Joy at having known someone who took such delight in being alive and such pleasure in celebrating Indian culture, and sadness that she is no longer with us. We first met during my visit to India in 1956 to attend the 2500 Buddha Jayanti celebrations, and renewed our friendship following my escape from Tibet in 1959. Because of the consistent warm affection and kindness she showered on me and other Tibetans, I always greeted her as Mataji. Although her special interest in later years was in classical dance and architecture, her scholarship extended to literature, painting, and music. Her knowledge and experience of Indian culture was deep as it was broad. She could well appreciate my commitment to striving to revive an appreciation of the knowledge of ancient India, especially as it relates to workings of the mind and emotions in the modern world. As a scholar and teacher, she was generous in the encouragement she gave to those who sought her guidance. She also had the talent for administration and institution building. We Tibetans benefited from this in the dedicated support she gave to the establishment of the Central Institute of Higher Tibetan Studies in Sarnath. The other institution that I particularly associate with her is the India International Center, which I understand she made a tremendous contribution to nurturing. This is where we met most frequently in recent years. I'm pleased and grateful to know that the staff and members and the community of the India International Center looked after Mataji so well as she aged. It is wonderful that her friends and colleagues are gathering to hold a memorial meeting for her on the 10th of October at the India International Center. She lived a long and meaningful life. And if I may just add to, sort of the mentions of her resting at peace and the highest traditions that His Holiness embodies, of continuing to strive to come back in human form, to continue to teach and serve humanity. I think that is, for us who have been students of Kapilaji, that embodies who she was. And forgive my sort of extra words at this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mehrotra. Dr. Vatsyayan's work in the field of craft is well known. There is no better person to pay tribute to her than Sri Ashok Chatterjee, who has worked for several years with artisans and was president of the Crafts Council of India for over 20 years. He too is joining us through a virtual link.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to join all of you to celebrate Kapilaji's life and her work. She was and is a national treasure, and her scholarship and wisdom has enriched IIC through all these years. And now her clear stream of reason has joined that great ocean of wisdom to which she always pointed in her interactions with each one of us. For me, Kapilaji's most enduring quality was her relentless pursuit of quality, no matter at what price such a commitment might demand. And perhaps it was this commitment that drew Kapila and me together through an obsession both of us shared with the art of the great dancer Shanta Rao, one of India's greatest artists whose enormous contributions were made in relative obscurity and far from hype and patronage. Kapilaji, like Shanta, was intolerant of humbug or anything that bordered on the sloppy. And it was through the pursuit of the art of Shantarao for decades that we shared this common belief in art and what it really meant in terms of the demands it made on those who served art and culture with integrity. It brought us together as colleagues in a cause. And that moved rather smoothly when I moved into the service of artisans and design education. It was Kapila again who was there to guide and counsel. It was she who understood that there could be no distinction between art and craft, that these distinctions were artificial, and that the need of artisans for respect was as great as their need for opportunity. How to navigate these straits between culture and commerce stood me in good stead when I moved into design education. And there again, it was Kapila's understanding of what was engaging us at the National Institute of Design to bring a modern profession of design to a nation with the oldest unbroken design tradition in the world, and yet, as Kapilaji would remind me, without a single word in any of our myriad languages for design as a contemporary problem-solving profession that NID was devoted to bring to this country. She would say, don't worry about terms. Focus on context. That was her favorite word, context. Once you understand the context, she would say, the path will be clear. This was the advice again that she gave us at Ahmedabad University when we started the Center for Heritage Management. Again, she would say, please don't get trapped in these artificial constructs between tangible and intangible heritage. Let others bother with all that. We in Asia know that there is no such division. She would tell me, think of what happens at the Urs of Nizamuddin. Think of the Ghats of Varanasi at the time of Aarti. Where does tangible heritage begin and where does the intangible heritage end? There is no such division. And it is this that has helped us, I think, in this new effort to find a path. These last years have been difficult for Kapilaji in many ways. Health, certainly, but much more, there was immense sadness as she saw so much of the values and the spirit of what her generation had given to a free India under such relentless attack. No visit to IIC was ever complete without going to her room and sitting with her, sometimes just holding hands, and often she would be in tears. And yet she had tremendous hope in the young generation of our country. And she would keep telling me, don't ever lose faith. The young will find the way. Hopefully, the India of her dreams, a diverse, tolerant, and humane society, will live and will prosper and will endure. And may she never be forgotten in the country to which she gave her all. Thank you once again for this opportunity to celebrate a great Indian and a great life.
Ji. Taking her Kapila Ji's achievements even further and the extraordinary nature of her achievements, Dr. Vatsyayan was also trained in Kathak, Manipuri, Bharatnatyam, and Odissi. To honor her memory, senior dancer and guru and Odissi exponent, Srimati Madhavi Mudgal, will pay tribute.
Namaskar. Kapila Ji, a dancer, thinker, researcher, aesthetician, writer, administrator. I find it very difficult to describe her. She held many avatars simultaneously. Perhaps the greatest scholar of our times, especially in the field of dance, she was instrumental in bridging the gap between prayog and shastra, that is, practice and theory, leading a lot of us dancers to a field of inquiry. She did so by actually pursuing training in dance in various styles with the greatest of gurus who were deeply entrenched in their own traditions. Gurus like Pandit Achan Maharaj in Kathak, Guru Amarbi Singh in Manipuri, and Pandanallur Meenakshi Sundaram Pillai in Bharatanatyam, three completely diverse styles. By assimilating and critically analyzing the technique of dance, along with the other arts like architecture, sculpture, painting, music, and literature, she articulated the underlying essence that permeates the Indian artistic traditions, as well as their mutual connection. One of the many books she authored was Classical Indian Dance in the Arts and Literature, in Literature and the Arts, published about 50 years ago, and it is still a valuable resource to understanding this complex art for us dancers. Her research was not limited to the classical alone. She explored the traditions of the folk and tribal and was a great advocate of rethinking the categorization of the classical, folk, and tribal. She spoke of an integrated tradition, that which is multi-layered, multifaceted, multi-formed, and multi-regional. How the Margi, one that follows a structured path, and Deshi, which is of the region, are complementary. The distinction that marks the classical as a sophisticated and folk as primitive did not figure in her thought. On a personal note, she knew me since the time I was born. Her mother, Srimati Satyavati Malik, fondly called Annaji, was herself a writer, painter, musician, and institution builder. My father, Pandit Vinay Chandra Maudgalya, founded the Gandharva Mahavidyalaya in 1939 to propagate classical music and dance within the culturally barren city of Delhi. At that time, learning of music was not considered respectable, and students were hard to come by. It was Annaji who brought her children Kapila and Subhashi, where he's present here today, to the Gandharva Vidyalaya as one of the first students, and her active participation and support in its activities throughout her life gave great support to my father. Kapilaji continued this legacy and was a part of the Vidyalaya in various capacities up to her passing away. I was fortunate to have Kapilaji's presence in the Angahar Odissi Dance Festival that I had organized in 1985, which had brought together for the first time all the luminaries connected with the dance. Gurus, scholars, dancers, even the Devadasi, the Mahari, who was living then, and the Kotipurs. I remember how in a seminar during the festival, she lined up all the senior gurus and asked them to demonstrate a particular stance, something that only she could do. I was also part of a pet multimedia project of Geeta Govind. My Shata Shata Pranam to her. I'm sure her work will continue to inspire and enrich the coming generations of dancers. Namaskar.
Thank you, Madhviji. At the very start of her career, Dr. Vatsyayan was a teacher at Delhi University. Dr. Sukrita Paul Kumar, poet and former professor at Delhi University, took inspiration and guidance from Dr. Vatsyayan for several books and projects. I invite Sukritaji to speak to us.
Yes, the inevitable has happened. It's, yes, like everybody is saying, I think it was difficult to digest this fact that you come to IIC and you don't have the physical presence of Kapilaji. Somewhere it's like a void that has been created personally for me, and I'm sure for many of us here who were very closely associated with her in some way or the other. Every time I took on a project to do or a poem to write or a lesson to teach to my students, somewhere I would think of her as the source of inspiration, source of also discipline. Also the fact that what if I did this, what's she going to say? Even if she were not going to say anything, there was always that feeling that I am on trial with her. And I think many of us teachers, on behalf of teachers, scholars, poets, who have been associated with her in some way or the other, it always seemed very personal, and yet there was a lot of objectivity when it comes to actually reprimanding one if one were taking a track which she would not appreciate, because she was a person of vision, insight, and something which many of us usually lack in, that vision which tells you what is right, what is ethical, what is correct. And so therefore, I think there is a big responsibility on us now, a huge responsibility to carry on the legacy, because I think that is really paying a homage to her if we were to remember what she uh, taught us in a variety of ways. She would not sit me down and teach anything, but I remember when I had taken on a huge task of doing, I was to direct a month-long program in IGNCA on folk and tribal tradition of Mahabharata. And very happily thinking that I had done the job quite well with Molly Kaushal, we both made a kind of a research paper, a concept note, and went to her thinking that we were going to get pats on our back. But you think we got that? It would have been, I mean, she just looked at it and said, no, do it again. Do it again. I mean, we'd worked on the document for 2 weeks, but sure, I mean, what she told us was extremely valuable. She said, all knowledge has to be experiential. And you have to think of cultural zones, not regions. We had gone very happily thinking, okay, HP would mean this, and Madhya Pradesh would mean this, and so on. She said, no, these are zones that you have to think, and there is trans-regionality in our country. And we need to value it. Value the autotelic tales which travel from one part to another. A tale might undergo some kind of a change depending on the eco-cultural locale in which it is planted. It might have some difference to narrate, but the essential will be the same. And therefore, I remember when she told me the story of the flowering tree, which A.K. Ramanujan also took up. And she said, look, this is how it goes on in Kashmir, but you have it in Kannada slightly differently, but it exists there. And talking about languages, I think this is something that we have to understand, all of us, particularly in today's day and age, when there is so much of cacophony, so much of use of language. To her, the word was sacred. And that is why one had to be very careful of what one was saying to her. What words are we using? Because every word carries an import which is philosophically, geographically, culturally evolved. And therefore, the word has come to be. So languages were very important to her. And that is why in a huge seminar on linguistic plurality, when I was also involved in that with Professor Anvita Abhi, I think it was a grand occasion to understand the specificity of each language, which is rooted in a certain geography in India, and yet again, when it flowers out, it has to flower out through its creative input by all the poets, literateurs, etc., who make and unmake, code and decode a language, and then recode a language. So this kind of a process of evolution, linguistic evolution, cultural evolution, and therefore the question of modernity and tradition. She did not have that binary. The dynamism of tradition is modernism. And this is, I mean, it's simply put like that, but do we understand what that really means? One has to really get under the skin of this phrase to be able to understand how there is a continuum, and whether it is crossing political boundaries or borders, or psychologically created binaries. I think it was Kapilaji's wisdom and vision that told us that integrated vision is what has to be used in constructing knowledge. And that constructing knowledge, I think, requires, we've been saying it forever, decolonize our minds, because the British system is still continuing to a large extent. But in order to decolonize our minds, I think it's extremely important to understand that we are bilingual and not monolingual. And in order to know our bilingualism, we have to pay respect to our languages, whether it's the mother tongue or the national official language or whatever. So there are many, many points that we learn from her, and not only in terms of it shouldn't just be seen as a legacy which is frozen, but I think to make it dynamic, we have to undertake the responsibility to carry forward that understanding and vision. My deep Shraddhanjali to her.
Thank you, Sukrita. One name that cannot be delinked from Dr. Vatsyayan is Mr. N.H. Ramachandran. If you saw one, you saw the other. He's been at the center since the 1960s, so he's known her that long, and he worked with Dr. Vatsyayan in the Asia project from 2003 to date. Mr. Ramachandran?
My working in the India International Center since 1959 had given me an opportunity for being in touch with several great personalities. The foremost among these were Dr. C.D. Deshmukh, Dr. Durgabai Deshmukh, Srimati Kapila Chattopadhyay and Dr. Kapila Vatsyayan. Dr. Vatsyayan became a life trustee, succeeding Kapila Devi in 1988. I had the privilege of working directly under her when she headed the IAC Asia project since 2003. Working with her was not all that difficult, as some might think. To use an expression she would often employ, for me it was in many respects a learning experience. Her expounding on concepts like plurality, inclusiveness, interdisciplinarity, universality, oral versus written, all widened my own interest and knowledge. The articles and the speeches she contributed, spread over a number of years, shows her perseverance in pursuing many important issues of her concern. These themes included the need to empower and give status in the society to artisans and craftspersons, which she took up with the government at the highest level, and the need to prevent the fast vanishing languages and dialects of India, on which she planned conferences. She was firm that the programs of the Asia Project focused more on cultural and civilizational aspects of Asian relations, with special reference to the role of women, and should not get bogged down on the current political, economic, or security aspects. Hence, the conferences on themes such as Sui Daga, Indigo, relevance of traditional values in Asia, the alternative systems of medicine in Asia, Asian women's writings and anthology, documentaries made by Asian women filmmakers, etc. Kapilaji used to admire people following their customs and traditions, whether in the matter of rituals or preparation of special foods for the occasion. She used to get furious when persons talked of aging or age-related illnesses, or similarly, when one brands people as illiterate, despite their fund of knowledge and experience in the field. Kapilaji had a phenomenal memory and narrative power. Her narration of many past events and incidents would bring the image of their happening before your eyes. For instance, presenting Srimati Balasaraswati's dance in Japan, or organizing folk dances as part of the Republic Day parade. All these and more come out in her biographical account, Afloat a Lotus Leaf by Jyoti Sabarwal. I had the pleasure of being present in her lectures or meetings participated by her at different places outside Delhi, in Pune, Raichur, Thrissur, and at the Ramakrishna Mission Institute in Calcutta, and in one instance in Kuala Lumpur. Dr. Vatsyayan would claim with pride that she was probably the only person who attended most of the lectures and discussions at IIC. Later on, she used to get cassettes of the programs to listen to them leisurely at her house. I and my colleague used to read out to her important articles in the newspapers and chapters of books. By the way, I think that one's interest in and appreciation of the writing is enhanced when read out aloud in shared reading. At the end, I would say that I consider that my greatest takeaway from my long years of working with Dr. Kapila Vatsyayan was the opportunity it provided to me to get to know of a large number of her friends with diverse interests and experience from India and abroad, which could never be replicated for me at any other setting. These few remarks, I pay my humble homage to Dr. Kapila.
Thank you, Mr. Ramachandran. I now request Vishwajit, member of IIC staff, to speak. Vishwajit never left Dr. Vatsayan's side, even till the very end.
यहाँ पर उपस्थित सभी महानुभावों को मेरा सादर प्रणाम। मैंने इस संस्था में 1997 से काम करना शुरू किया था। सर्वप्रथम मैंने 6 वर्षों तक आदरणीय डॉक्टर कर्ण सिंह जी के पास तथा राजेंद्र जी के साथ एशिया प्रोजेक्ट में काम किया। तत्पश्चात वर्ष 2003 में आदरणीय डॉक्टर कपिला वात्स्यायन जी ने एशिया प्रोजेक्ट का कार्यभार संभाला और मुझे फिर से एशिया प्रोजेक्ट में काम करने का मौका मिला। मैं यहाँ बताना चाहता हूँ कि आईआईसी में उनको माता जी ही कहते थे और मैंने माता जी के बारे में सुना था कि वे बहुत सख्त स्वभाव की हैं, परंतु मैंने उन्हें इसके विपरीत पाया। वे हर किसी को बहुत चिंता करती थी और विशेषकर आईआईसी परिवार से तो बहुत ही ज्यादा प्यार करती थी। जब से मैंने उनके पास काम करना शुरू किया, प्रथम दिन से ही उन्होंने मुझे छोटे बच्चे की तरह काम सिखाना शुरू किया और अंततः लास्ट समय तक मुझे कुछ ना कुछ सिखाती ही रही। उनके पास काम करते हुए मुझे कुछ ही समय हुआ था, मुझे महसूस होता था कि मैं उनके घर का सदस्य हूँ और माता जी मुझे पूर्ण रूप से अपने घर का सदस्य ही मानती थी। उसका एक उदाहरण है कि वर्ष 2006 में मेरी पत्नी बबीता को हार्ट की प्रॉब्लम हो गई। इस बात की माता जी को पता चला तो मुझसे ज्यादा परेशान हो गई। मुझसे कहा, बबीता की रिपोर्ट लेकर आओ, और उन रिपोर्टों को लेकर वे दिल्ली के बड़े बड़े डॉक्टरों के पास तब तक दिखाती रही जब तक उन्हें ये तसल्ली नहीं हो गई कि इसका ऑपरेशन ही इसका इलाज है। अंततः उन्होंने मुझे एम्स में ऑपरेशन करवाने की सलाह दी। और माता जी के मातृत्व में मैं एक और बात शेयर करना चाहता हूँ। वर्ष 2017 में बबीता एक बार फिर से बहुत बीमार हो गई और उन्हें वेंटिलेटर में रखना पड़ा। यह बात माता जी को पता चली तो वह मुझे दुखी देखकर इतना भावुक हो गई कि उनकी आंखों में आंसू आ गए और उन्होंने कहा, बेटा इलाज करवाओ, किसी बात की चिंता मत करना, मैं बैठी हूं ना। और आज मेरी पत्नी उनके आशीर्वाद से ठीक ठाक है। वे हर समय हमारा ख्याल करती थी, जहां कहीं भी हूं, मीटिंग में हूं, बाहर हूं, वो खुद खाना खाने से पहले अपने साथ के सभी लोगों को खाने के लिए जरूर पूछती थी। अंतिम दिनों की बात है, जब वे हॉस्पिटल में थी और मैं उनके पास था, तो मैं जब भी हॉस्पिटल जाता था तो वो आईआईसी के बारे में जरूर पूछती थी कि आईआईसी में क्या हो रहा है, आईआईसी कैसे चल रहा है। और एक दिन दोपहर को उन्होंने मुझसे पूछा, बेटा समय क्या हुआ है? मैंने बताया 12:45। उन्होंने कहा, आपने खाना खाया? मैंने कहा, मैं आईआईसी में जाकर खाना खाऊंगा। फिर मुझे एक बड़ी हैरानी हुई उनकी बात सुनकर कि उन्होंने वे कैंटीन कब देखी होगी जो अस्पताल के अंदर ही थी। हमें कहा, बाहर मत जाओ, बाहर बहुत धूप है, तुम यहीं खाना खा लो। और माता जी के साथ इतने वर्षों रहकर मैंने यह अनुभव किया है कि बाहर से वो जितनी सख्त थी, अंदर से उतनी ही उदार और कोमल थी। ये मेरे लिए बड़े सौभाग्य की बात है, बड़े गौरव की बात है कि मुझे उनका प्यार और आशीर्वाद दोनों मिले। ओम शांति, ओम शांति।
Thank you, Vishwajit. I request Professor Aditya Malik, Dr. Vatsayan's nephew, to speak on behalf of the family.
I thank you all for being here today on behalf of my family to pay tribute, to pay respect, and to pay homage to Kapila ji, my aunt. Growing up as a child, one only has a vague awareness of the qualities, the greatness that one's family members embody. And there are so many qualities, so many capacities that all of you have spoken of. Brilliance, penetrating insight, exacting, demanding, rigorous, generous, kind, exceedingly creative and intelligent, deeply inspiring and compassionate. But to all these qualities and descriptions, and there are so many, visible in her accomplishments, in the awards she has received, in the publications that she has, and in all the commemorative speeches and tributes that have poured in from across this country and across the world, do they adequately describe Kapila Vatsyayan? someone who called herself an unbounded, bounded individual. Behind all of this, there is something more difficult to grasp because it is unseen, perhaps invisible. All of this is a manifestation of a tremendous commitment and a tremendous ability to generate from the essential power of being, a power that has the capacity to intervene in the inevitable movement of time and the ordinary configurations of space to create a new imagination of the civilizational and cultural space we call India. This is a deep, penetrating, profound imagination that results in a new way in which India perceives and experiences and knows itself. Kapila ji spoke long before it became fashionable of a holistic understanding of Indian culture. She spoke of multidisciplinarity. She spoke of plural yet profoundly interconnected worlds and perspectives in a manner that was at once academically and yet also culturally and politically relevant then and now. The breadth of this imagination was so vast as this subcontinent and so deep as the ocean that surrounds it. The concrete product of this vision, perception, insight, was not only dozens and dozens of written volumes threading together the arts and sciences, as many of you have mentioned already, but also the establishment of creatively inspired institutions and locations spread across the country. And I won't name them because they've already been named here and spoken about so beautifully. In conferences, some of which I had the privilege of attending, it seemed that Kapila ji would put together notes made on small scraps of paper. From these small, insignificant strips would emerge some of the most profound, insightful interlinking of objects of thought and practice from seemingly disparate dimensions into one shimmering whole. This was truly quantum entanglement at the level of culture, of history, of ideas, theory, practice, and vision across sciences, technology, humanities, arts, dance, poetry, and painting. Her passing has left an empty space for me and my family, and for my daughters, whom she was very close to. My father, my mother, my aunts. I hope and I know that my daughters Renuka and Ambika and my nieces Alaika and Arya will embody the same qualities and embody the legacy that she is and has left behind, one of being independent, of being strong, of being creative, of being intelligent, of being committed, and of being courageous, no matter what. Each one of us has to now find their place in the space that she has left behind. I'd like to leave you with a poem written by Maya Angelou, an African-American poet, writer, civil rights activist who worked closely with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. When great trees fall, when great trees fall, rocks on distant hills shudder. Lions hunker down in tall grasses, and even elephants lumber after safety. When great trees fall in forests, small things recoil into silence, their senses eroded beyond fear. When great souls die, the air around us becomes light, rare, sterile. We breathe briefly, Our eyes briefly see with a hurtful clarity. Our memory, suddenly sharpened, examines, gnaws on kind words, unsaid, promised walks never taken. Great souls die, and our reality, bound to them, takes leave of us. Our souls, dependent upon their nurture, now shrink, wizened. Our minds, formed and informed by their radiance, fall away. We are not so much maddened as reduced to the unutterable ignorance of dark, cold caves. And when great souls die, after a period, peace blooms, slowly and always irregularly. Spaces fill with a kind of soothing electric vibration. Our senses restored, never to be the same, whisper to us, they existed, we can be and be better, for they existed. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Malik. I would like to take just 1 minute to pay my tribute to Dr. Vatsyayan because she deeply appreciated the work we put into the IIC quarterly. She never missed a launch. Even if she wasn't feeling very well, she'd come for at least a few minutes and invariably asked Mr. Ramachandran to call and tell me how much she liked a particular article or how much she didn't like that article. We have lost a staunch supporter and we will miss her. Thank you. Please join us for tea.